The first vertebrates who, in the Carboniferous period, abandoned aquatic life for terrestrial, descended from the osseous, pulmonate fish whose fins were capable of rotation beneath their bodies and thus could be used as paws on the earth.
By then it was clear that the water period was coming to an end. Those who decided to make the great move were growing more and more numerous. There wasn't a family that didn't have some loved one up on dry land, and they called back to their relatives to join them. But we had a great uncle who was a fish. This great uncle lived in a certain muddy shallows, in the lagoon where all our ancestors had been born. "Uncle Emba, we've come to pay you a visit. Were you expecting us?" we would shout, slapping our paws and tails in the water to attract his attention. "We brought you some insects that grow where we live. Uncle Emba, have you ever seen such fat cockroaches? Taste one and see if you like it." "You clean those revolting warts you've got with your stinking cockroaches." Our great uncle's answer was always some remark of this sort, or perhaps even ruder. This was how he welcomed us every time. We made various attempts to get him up on land with us, but it was pointless, because our uncle wouldn't dream of leaving. This was about the time when I fell in love. Elle and I spent our days together, chasing each other. No one as quick as she had ever been seen before. Nothing seemed so far from aquatic life as she did. When you looked at her smooth skin, you felt that scales never existed. Her relatives were one of those families who had become established on Earth early and had become convinced that they had never lived anywhere else. The time had come for Elle to meet my family, and its oldest and most authoritative member was Great Uncle Emba. I couldn't avoid a visit to him, but I postponed it out of embarrassment. I hadn't yet dared tell Elle that my great uncle was a fish. One day we wandered off to one of those damp promontories that girdle the lagoon, and the surface of the lagoon gurgled with bubbles and allowed a nose, all covered with spiky scales, to appear. Never before had my great uncle seemed so different from the rest of us. A real monster. "Uncle, if you don't mind, I have the pleasure to present to you my future bride, Elle," and I pointed to my fiancée. "And so, young lady, you've come to wet your tail a bit, eh?" I could have sunk into the ground from shame. Not even I had realized the full extent of his fishiness. When we finally took our leave, I trotted along silently behind Elle. I was thinking that now she would begin to make her comments, that the worst was still to come. But then Elle said, "He's very nice, your uncle." The next time our visit to the lagoon lasted longer. The fish started one of his usual tirades, the superiority of water respiration to air breathing. Elle argued seriously, defending our point of view, but as if she was also taking old Emba's notions into consideration. According to my great-uncle, the lands that had emerged were a limited phenomenon. They were going to disappear just as they had cropped up. This prospect was an absolute contradiction to the optimism in which we children of the coast had been brought up, and I opposed the idea with shocked protests. For me, the true confutation of these arguments was Elle. In her, I saw the perfect definitive form. Born from the conquests of the land that had emerged, she was the sum of the new boundless possibilities that had opened. "But now we gallop over valleys and mountains, uncle," I cried. "Go on with you, tadpole. When you're wet again, you'll be back home." "Don't you think, uncle, that if we wanted to learn to breathe underwater, it would be too late?" Elle asked earnestly. "If you're game, sweetie," the fish said, "I can teach you in a minute." Elle came out with an odd laugh, and then began to run away, to run on, beyond all pursuit. Had I lost her? Suspecting this, I hastened to woo her back, but unfortunately, whenever I did something brave, she wasn't there. She went to the lagoon, where my great-uncle was teaching her to swim underwater. I saw them surface together. They were moving along at the same speed, like brother and sister. It was a game for her, I understood, but a game I didn't like. I had to recall her to reality, to the future that was awaiting her. "Elle, I have to talk to you. You've been amusing yourself long enough. We have more important things ahead of us. I've discovered a passage in the mountains. We'll be the first to settle there. We'll populate unknown lands. You and I and our children." "The sea is immense," Elle said. "Stop repeating that old fool's nonsense. The world belongs to those with legs, not to fish, and you know it. I know that he's somebody, who is somebody. And what about me? There's nobody with legs who is like him. In your family, we've quarreled. They don't understand anything. Why, you're crazy. Nobody can turn back. I can. And what do you think you'll do? All alone with an old fish. Marry him? Be a fish again, and bring still more fish into this world. Goodbye. And with one of those rapid climbs first, she reached the top of a fern frond, bent it toward the lagoon, and let go in a dive. She surfaced, and the sturdy, curved tail of great Uncle Emba rose near hers, and together they cleft the waters. It was a hard blow for me, but after all, what could I do about it? I went on my way in the midst of the world's transformations, being transformed myself. Every now and then, among the many forms of living beings, I encountered one who was somebody, more than I was, who announced the future. They all had something, I know, that made them somehow superior to me, and yet I wouldn't have traded places with any of them.